Okay, now we're getting a quick stop in the southwest. On the upper shelf, we have pottery that tends to be anywhere from 40 to 100 years old. To the very left is what's called a storyteller doll, San Ildefonso Pueblo. There are actually two of them, a big one, a smaller one. Sort of, it's a depiction of a woman with a child, and this particular type of pottery was developed by a San Ildefonso Pueblo woman named Helen Cordero, and probably about 10 different people began making them. And then to the right of that bigger piece of pottery is Zia, and then beyond that, you can only see half of it, is a piece by a Hopi woman named Fanny Nampeo. Her mother was probably the most famous potter out of Hopi ever. Her name was simply Nampeo. But if you look at the shelf below, those are not 40 to 100 years old. Those are more like 700 to 1200 years old. Those are pieces of Anasazi pottery. Obviously, there are a few things in the foreground, but the pottery pieces are Anasazi, and they have various handles, and let's have next slide. This is the same two shelves, but further over. Up on the top, we still have some newer pottery. When I say newer, to the left is a Zuni Shalako ceremony pot, the one with the dragonfly on it, and the inside has the residue of tea from the Shalako ceremony. And over to the far right on the top shelf are two effigy figures that are Mojave Indian effigy figures, sort of brown clay, red paint on them, beaded colors, and faces that are painted yellow. And those date from about 1880 to 1900. And I love that pot somewhat in the middle that has the image of a blanket on the pot. So that's what attracted me to that. Then if we go down one shelf, we find pieces. Some of this is Anasazi, 700 to 1200 years ago, but it could be from related groups somewhat further to the south of the Anasazi, Magayan, Sinawa, trying to see if there's any Hohokam. That ladle somewhat in the front is probably Hohokam. Next slide, please. Okay, this piece of pottery is by the second of the two most famous Native American potters that people may have heard of. This is by Maria from San Ildefonso Pueblo, and she was quite renowned, and she developed this black matte on black technology, the way you could create and fire a pot and bring out that design, those colors. And it's hard to make out here, but there is a water serpent called an avanyu circling the pot, and it's somewhat like a snake figure. Next slide, please. And still working our way towards California, we reach Zuni Pueblo. And this is a Zuni with figures of heart-lined deer. That's sort of a common motif used by the Zuni. And this pot probably dates from about 1900, which for Zuni pot is a good age. And next slide, please. And this is a bowl that is also Zuni, just mostly abstract, but pretty wonderful designs. In the center, there may be leaves rather than abstract. And then on the next slide, we'll see the other side of this bowl. Next slide. And these are called stew bowls. They're eating bowls. Next slide, please. Now this is, I mentioned Fanny Nampeo. This is by her mother, Nampeo. This probably is about maybe 1890s, maybe very early 1900s. It's a fairly large pot, and it's got an absolutely recognizable Nampeo design. many of us can look at a painting by, let's say, maybe Van Gogh, and we realize, oh, that's a Van Gogh. We've seen enough books in school and in our classes that we can recognize that. Well, those of us who collect these kind of things look at that and say, Nampeo. And that's a wonderful thing to find. Next slide, please. Now we're still in Hopi land. Nampeo is Hopi. This is a cape woven of cotton with wool embroidery, and it's used in a kachina dance. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful piece found about 35 years ago at the Long Beach Antique Flea Market. And it's in the colored portions of it, to the left, middle, and right, are rain clouds, and the black and white is rain falling. Below that is the earth. And the other two areas are corn sprouting out of the ground, and you see the stalks of corn. But the other designs in this come from designs that go back 800, 900, 1,000 years ago on Anasazi designs. And the Hopi were there in the Southwest while the Anasazi were there in Old Oribe, one of their villages. And they're very conservative. They use the same designs again and again with a little individual variation. Next, please. And this is, now the Hopi, they live on 3 mesas in Arizona. They used to live in a few other places, but in Spanish American times, they got sort of pushed back to these 3 mesas: first mesa, second mesa, and third mesa. In second mesa, they make coiled pottery. You can see the spiraling coils of, not pottery, baskets, spiraling coils. And this is an image of a crow mother kachina. But on the third mesa, they make twined baskets. Next slide, please. So just one mesa over, look how very different the basket looks. And instead of a coil, the foundational part of it, the woof, runs vertical, and then running horizontally are twines in and out. Next slide, please. Now we're going to touch for a little bit on Navajo. This is a Navajo saddle blanket from about 1890. So if you're going to have a horse and ride a horse, you're going to have a saddle blanket. And if you're going to have a saddle blanket, you want a colorful saddle blanket. And by the way, in the middle basket is Panamint from right near Death Valley. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And here is a wonderful find about 35 years ago from Rose Bowl Flea Market. And this is what's called a sand painting rug. It's got 4 what are called yay figures, sort of spiritual figures of the Navajo. You can see their heads at the top, you can see their legs at the bottom. They have very abstracted long bodies between their skirts and their heads. And I don't think you can make it out in this photo, but to the, between each pair of yay figures comes down a snake which has a head just above the skirt area. But this is a very very finely woven rug during a period when the Navajos were usually weaving rugs coarsely. So it's a pretty special piece. Next slide, please. And we're getting really close to California. This is Papago. It's a Papago pot, sort of southern Sonoran desert, down Phoenix and south, desert people, and made out of the clay of the region, but painted with red design. Next slide, please. This is a much, much bigger pot. And this is also Papago, you can see how big it is just by looking at the books in the back. This pot would be buried in the ground up to the top, and then you would go out and harvest a bunch of saguaro cactus bulbs, and you'd mash them up, and you'd fill up this pot with your mashed up cactus bulbs, cactus fruit, and you'd ferment it for 4 days and have a really big party. Next slide, please. Okay, and the Pima were living more along the rivers of southern Arizona, while the Papago were off in the desert. Hundreds of years before that, there were peoples in the same places that were called the desert Hohokam and the river Hohokam. And for a long time, people thought those civilizations disappeared and that the Pima and Papago magically appeared. Well, guess what? They never left. They're the same people. But I love the Pima because they often, not all that often, but on occasion, weave animals and figures into their baskets. So we see 4 different baskets here, two stacks of 2 with horses and women and men and other designs. Next slide, please. And this particular one is a Pima basket with the men on top and the horses below. Next slide, please. And here, this is an Apache basket actually, but here we have people riding the horses. So quite a number of horse riders in this basket. Next, please. And now we're going to talk about, somebody here mentioned they have a mortar and pestle from this very local area. Well, over in Arizona, you would run into manos and matates like this. And this one was probably used for grinding up the lime used to cover the adobe houses of one of the pueblos, maybe Hopi, maybe one of the others, because the lime remnants are still in the matate, which goes back about maybe 1,000 years. Next slide, please. But then we get to California, finally. And California, we have mortars and pestles. And sometimes, as I'm sure many of you have encountered, bedrock mortar holes just like this, but in bedrock, still around here. There's a number of these up in the Santa Monica Mountains. Next slide, please. But then we have yet a third sort of design. This is another grinding stone, but it's not a mortar and pestle exactly. But it's for the same purpose, to grind up seeds or acorns or whatever. Next slide, please. Now we're really in California, but we're in Northern California. Hupa, a nice old Hupa storage basket. Next slide, please. And then we have Hupa hats. And so this is a Hupa hat made by Ada Charles, who is now deceased but was alive and very elderly when I collected this in about 1980. And it has little patches of porcupine quill again woven into it. You can see the yellow section right in the center of the basket. Next slide, please. And this is a basket, I love finding a rare example like this. This is a basket under construction. It's not finished, but you can see how a twine basket is made by this partially finished basket. When this is finished, they'd break off those parts at the top down flush with the wefts, and then you'd see the finished basket. Next slide, please. And this is a much more rare basket, up from the same area as the Hupa and Yurok and Karuk, of whom there are a good number of peoples still living in a very organized tribal way with sort of intact culture and such. But this basket is from a neighboring tribe, probably Tolowa, which is over even closer to the coast. Next slide, please. And now we get further down the coast, just above San Francisco, Point Reyes and up towards Mendocino. This is pomo. And with pomo are really good at tight weaves, really fine preparation of the weft materials, and then tight weaves, and just beautiful artistic renderings. Next slide, please. Now this is up towards the Sierras and getting over towards Yosemite. This is Mono, and this is the basket upside down. It actually, the shape is distorted in this photograph. Next photograph, please. This is right side up. But you'll soon see why I particularly love this basket. This basket looks pristine, but it was used for a lot of meals, a lot of porridge or acorn mush or something similar was cooked in this basket. Look at the difference between how crisp the figures are on the outside, next slide please, and the inside. The design is worn away. Everything's worn. Next slide please. Now we get sort of down Mono Lake in south, Paiute territory, up the east side of the Sierras, going up the 395. And the Paiute, they have a wonderful artistry all of their own. You might be able to make out that everything is woven on the diagonal in this basket, except little patches of double parallel stitches, which are a very subtle design in the background. Now, look at the colored portions. They are all dark, right? They're all a really dark chocolate brown. And look at the design. It is sort of diamonds with a diamond inside of it. But what's it look like on the other side? Next slide, please. Here, we have the reverse image of what you saw on the outside of the basket. And what is also amazing is groups of diamonds are the dark brown, which is all the color on the outside of the basket, but other groups of diamonds on the inside are a lighter chocolate brown. I mean, think of the imagination and thought it takes to try to do that as you're weaving a basket. And this is a hat, by the way. Next, please. Okay, now we're down to Southern California, finally. This is a Cahuilla basket, sort of over towards Palm Springs, and it's an older basket, and in a very basic way, it has a rattlesnake going vertically up the front. Otherwise, sort of a chain design. Next slide, please. Now this basket is, Cahuilla baskets, there are a good number of them around, but this is a Serrano basket. These are the people who live north of the Cahuilla up into the mountains, like up towards Big Bear. And their baskets are far less common. I was really lucky to ever stumble upon this. And this basket, we see two colorations, again, a dark brown and then the background straw color. And by the way, if you look real closely, you can tell this is what is called a mission basket, and the last one you could see it too. You can tell it because the way the stitches are ended, they're tucked in under another stitch. And unless you really know what you're looking for, maybe you can't see it, but it's diagnostic. It screams out, this is a mission basket. Now, a mission basket, what mission? Pretty much any of the missions, from Santa Barbara down to the San Diego County and San Diego mission. But this one is Serrano. But again, a dark brown banded color until, next slide please, you look at the bottom, it's got a sort of a brick red color on the bottom. And that's almost diagnostic of Serrano Indians. The casino out near San Bernardino, and I'm going to forget the name of it. Yes, San Manuel Mission, it now has a new name. They're Serrano people. Next, please. This is my mystery basket. It looks an awful lot like a Chumash basket in many ways. The design looks absolutely Chumash, with one exception. It does not have a band going around the outside, which 97%, let's say, of Chumash baskets do, but not all of them. And this one also has what are interpreted as sort of bird figures, geese figures, coming out of the bands of 3 triangles. Okay, now let's get right home. Next slide, please. Okay, here where we live, an explorer named Alejandro Malaspina, Spanish, came up, it's about, I think it was about the 1780s, and he collected some incredible early pieces up in Alaska, Tlingit Indian pieces, but he stopped right off the coast here. And so this image in the middle shows him further north, encountering a lot of icebergs. But he collected Chumash baskets from, between here and San Luis Obispo somewhere. Next slide, please. And he had an artist with him named Surya who painted images of the Indian peoples they were encountering. Wonderful early ethnographic pieces of which only a few such paintings exist, but they allow us to see what the native peoples looked like at the time of contact. Next, please. And here we have a couple slides of images of the baskets that Malaspina collected in, let's say, the 1780s. So, and again, if one studies baskets, especially the 2 on the left, but really all 4, all 4 scream out Chumash. You look at that and you say, that's Chumash. And by the way, they have, I mentioned the band, you can see it in the lower left, this typical band around the outside. A few of the Malaspina baskets don't have that band. Next slide, please. Here are a few more. Again, just scream out Chumash, and they're wonderful early Chumash. Next slide, please. And finally, 5 more. And the second one down from the top, it doesn't have that band. So I still wonder if the basket I have is Chumash. Next slide, please. Now, the next 4 slides actually are of 3 different baskets. There are 2 images of one of them. These are Chumash baskets, roughly of the same era as the ones Malaspina collected. These ones might be, 20, 30, 40 years newer, but probably before the mid-1830s. And I say that because the Chumash people were really devastated when the missions to which they had been gathered were secularized. I think it was 1834. And essentially they were just thrown off the land and Spanish landowners moved in and turned them into ranches and pretty much looted the missions and did nothing to take care of the Chumash people. And the Chumash people, their basket making pretty much stopped for several generations. There was a bit of a revival in the late 1800s by several weavers. And there's a new revival right today of some younger women doing some incredible weaving of Chumash baskets. And you can get a sense of this whole story by going up to the San Ynez Band Chumash Reservation and seeing the museum they have there. It's really an extraordinary presentation. But now I'll make a point again. I said that museum exhibits are gone that show all the cultures we've just covered. You can now go to tribal museums to which things have been repatriated, and it's mostly the gaming tribes that have the money to put together a museum. But you only see the artifacts of one culture, not of all the cultures across America. So this is a really wonderful Chumash basket. Now these 3 Chumash baskets are not in my collection. They're in another California collection, but they are 3 remarkable pieces. Next slide, please. So this is the second of the 3, and just they're made of sumac and juncus, and they're great baskets from very long ago. Next slide, please. This is the inside of the last basket. Next slide, please. This is a sort of typical lidded jar or Oya-shaped basket. And there are examples of all of these in various museums, but the total number of Chumash baskets in existence still, that is from the older ones, is probably measured in the hundreds, probably somewhere 350 to 400. Now, when I say that, that's if you catalog all the known examples in museums or that we know of from private collections. But there are always a few more out there that haven't been identified yet. But these are just superb examples by the Indian peoples who lived, among other places, right here in Topanga. And that's the end of my presentation, but if any of you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. That's a great question.
Michael, could you get back on the mic and repeat the question, too? Sure.
What do I do with my collection? That's a great question. And decades ago, I viewed myself as the owner of my collection. Now, and I think this happens with all of us as we grow older, I realize I'm the caretaker of my collection. And if I take good care of it, it'll outlast me and be in as good a shape when I'm gone as when I collected things. And so what to do with it? I'm sort of at a crossroads where I'm considering several options. There was a time when I was considering donating the better parts of it to the Autry Museum. The Autry Museum might not accept it anymore. Why not? Because it becomes a cost item. The moment they accept it, they have to publish everything in it to all the Indian peoples covered by my collection, and then they have to wait and see whether any of those pieces are asked to be returned through repatriation. Probably very few of them would be, because many of these pieces are not covered by the Native American Indian Native American Grace and Repatriation Act. Probably the great majority are not. There might be a very few pieces that would fall within that category. And it's for the Indian peoples to tell us that. It's not for us to decide. But the process of publishing all these and going through the repatriation process it costs too much money, so museums don't want to accept donations anymore, generally. So what do we do with a collection like this? There may be certain institutions to which it could be given that would not be covered by NAGPRA because they've never accepted federal funds. That's the test. One option, of course, is to give it away to my children or good friends. But guess what? My children don't have a whole lot of extra room where they're living. It's hard to take in a really large collection. And another option is to recycle it, in a sense, into other private collections, sell it through auction houses. And if that happens, the next generation of caretakers will acquire it. And they'll have to answer the same question you just asked. So I'm not sure yet. I'm still evaluating what to do. And I'm watching what other people are doing with similar collections for the best ideas. Any other questions? Yes.
What was the color made of in this lower area? How did they color some of the colorations?
Okay. How did they, what were the colors? In this particular area, let's say Chumash and Topanga and Tataviam areas, most of the colors you're seeing are not dyed. They're the natural color of the different materials used. You know, juncus, for example, in this basket, I don't know if you can see it very well, but some of these chumash baskets, they sort of move from orange to white because that's how the juncus looks when it's harvested. And then some of the dark colors are dyed, but they would be dyed with, let's say, mineral elements of mud, or sometimes dyes are concocted by boiling vegetable matters. But you don't have the aniline dyes that you see in some of the porcupine quills or some of the Navajo weavings, for example. But the dyes are natural dyes developed by Indian peoples, and that's in all the earlier pieces, and then they begin to become dyes obtainable through trade, and a lot of those are in the mid-1800s, things like indigo, which is a plant-based dye, or cochineal, which is a insect-based red dye. But then pretty soon, 1860s, we developed aniline dyes, and those became available to Indian peoples. So the bright colors you see on porcupine quills, aniline dyes. Any other questions? Yes.
Can I say something about the juncus?
Yes.
The juncus, that is the coiled part around the inner core. I'm a California Indian basket weaver, and the inner core is either deergrass or yucca. The juncus is a reed that grows in water that is wrapped around, but the lower part of the juncus, if it grows under oaks, comes out that white-red rust color, which
Yes.
is part of the juncus. And then the black would either be devil's claw, which is black, or would be black walnut dye.
Right. Thank you very much. That's absolutely true. Good. And you knew my good friend Justin Farmer, who was one of the real leaders of your basket weaving organization.
He was a collector.
Yes, he was that too. I do have a basket he made.
I know.
Yes, but he was a collector too, and he collected pretty much everything I did for a while, but then he narrowed down and down and down to collecting Mission Indian baskets, and he gave a lot of his collection to the museum out in Palm Springs. Yes. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay, thank you. I think I see one other back there. One last question.
How do you preserve the baskets?
Yeah, how do we preserve things? And I had a conversation with one of you before the program about taking care of things. You know, in museums, they will have absolute climate control, humidity control, never touch anything other than with white gloves on your hands. But these artifacts were often used in the culture for years or decades without white gloves and without climate control, and they've lasted remarkably well. Look at those chumash baskets, 200 years old and in pretty darn good shape, and they weren't in climate control those whole 200 years. Different artifacts, you have to be aware of certain threats. Certainly with textiles, you have to worry about moths and silverfish. There are certain kinds of insects that eat into baskets and leave holes in them, but generally, the inside of a house, especially interior rooms that don't vary very much in temperature, are very good homes for artifacts like these. Well, yes, one more.
I will say one thing about the Hoopa Tribal Museum.
Yes.
We give all our artifacts spirit food because we believe that the spirit of the material and the spirit of the person making it combines. And our elders leave a little basket of quote-unquote spirit food to care for the spirit spirit in those artifacts.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.